This is an MGTD, some assembly required. Welcome to Robert's British Cars. This is part 2 in the restoration of the 1952 MGTD. To give you a little background about Robert's British Cars, I travel around looking for neglected or abandoned British sports cars that are in need of a little love. I bring them home and try to get them back on the road and maybe find a good buyer for them. So what I did is I found this 1952 MGTD sitting in a carport about 50 miles from here. We're going to try to get it back together, and today we're going to start with the front suspension. Here are the components we're going to be installing today. We got the shock and the spring, a bumper rebound, the lower wishbones, and of course the axle. I think I'm going to start with the bumper or rebound, and then I'm going to put on the little plate that the spring centers on. I'm going to start with the little rebound bumper here. Put up one little nut. Now we'll try to insert the spacer. This one is a 1/4 inch Whitworth, but these two are a 1/2 inch. Now we're going to install the little bracket that the spring centers on. We've got these two little nuts and bolts that drop right in here, like that. This goes up into the bottom on those bolts and is held in place with a lock washer and a nut. Here's our bolts coming through, and you can see here, we just got to put the plate on like that, and then grow another arm and put on the lock washer and the nut. We've got the nuts on the bolts. All we have to do now is tighten them up. If you didn't notice, those are two different sized nuts because one goes on with a 7/16 and the other one is a Whitworth. I don't know if it's going to be a 1/8 Whitworth, but I got to go get a Whitworth wrench and find out. But two different sized nuts. There you go, working on old cars. These are flathead screws, so I've got the flat screwdriver bit there, and I'm going to try to hold the other end with my 3/16 Whitworth. The other one is a 7/16. I can try to hold the other one here and torque it. Well, I was going to put the shock absorber on, but it just occurred to me, as I look in these holes, I can see the plate. Can you see it in there? It's covering half the hole. I can see the plate that the spring centers on, and that one and this one. So that means that those shock bolts are not going to go down all the way. We're going to have to come up with a plan. So what I did here is I put the 4 bolts in that hold down the shock absorber. And as you can see, this one does not go down as far as this one or the ones in the back. Well, here is where we ended up. That lock washer and the thickness of the shock was enough to take up the distance of the bolt after all. So we have all 4 bolts holding down the shock, and I torqued them all to 50 pounds. So hopefully the shock is now installed. Here's an interesting item I noticed on the shock absorber. There's this label on the side, and I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "Do not loosen pinch bolt. Shaft is preloaded." And then we've got some red marking paint on there so you don't loosen the shaft. Whoever rebuilt these was very thorough. Looking to see what we have left here, we have the lower wishbones, the spring, and the axle. Let's assemble the lower wishbones on the table here. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my grease and my bushings. These are the polyurethane bushings. And I am going to lube them up nicely and put them on the lower wishbone arm there. We'll take our brackets and we'll put one bracket over here on our bushing. We'll get the other bracket over here on the bushing. And then, of course, 2 more bushings. Then we have a large washer and the nut. Now, we're going to put on the spring plate. That goes in here. We've got 4 bolts, 2 long, 2 short. I put the long ones in the back, and they're going to go in with the nuts facing outward. Long bolts inboard, short bolts outboard. So this is kind of assembled. Now we're going to go put it on the frame of the car using these 4 bolts. I'm going to put a application of grease in the spring pan here, just to keep the spring from squeaking. So here's our spring plate and our bracket and our wishbone. We have to put them on these bolts, and the nuts are inboard, and the head of the bolt from the bottom of the car is outboard. So this has to go in there like that, and then we put a nut on it. And this will go up like that. We put a nut on it. These bolts are 9/16, and I've got it on my ratchet and the wrench, and we'll just snug those up. Okay, boys and girls, this is the best part of the program. We're going to try to put the spring between there and there. Now, the way I'm going to try to do this is I'm going to put the spring up here. I'm going to put the spring on there. I'm going to put a jack under the wishbone and try to hold it in place. I won't be able to compress it very much because there is no weight on the frame. After I get it in position, then I'm going to get a spring compressor and attach it either to here or to the shock absorber and to the control arm and try to squeeze them together. Let's see how this is going to work. As you can see now, I have the jack positioned under the spring plate, and I have the spring in position. And you can see up there, I have the spring positioned around that little positioning plate. And as we look down the way here, we can see that the jack stand is loose. So I already have the spring compressed about as much as I can because there's no weight on the frame. So here I have my spring compressors on the lower wishbone, and they're being held in place by that little bolt. Actually, they're hooked on the top of that little bolt that holds on the bumper and on the bottom of the wishbone. And now I'm going to tighten them up and try to close the distance between the wishbones and the shock absorber so I can put the axle in. So now I have the axle in the bottom wishbone. I put the bolt in there in the lower trunnion, and I have to get that bolt in the shock absorber. And as you can see, we're going to have to compress this spring quite a bit. Okay, here we go. I've got to turn each one a little bit at a time. Wow, we got a ways to go, huh? You know, I compressed this enough to put the actual bolt that comes with the spring compressor, which was too short, which is why I had to use this threaded rod. And finally, I compressed it enough to get that bolt in. Now all I have to do is release the spring compressors. Now let's go around and tighten everything down. These bolts, the bottom and top bolts, and make sure everything is tight and ready to go. Now we'll tighten the lower trunnion bolt. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but I think you get the idea. Okay, now that I've got it really torqued down, I'm going to try to back it off a little bit and see if I can get the shiny new cotter pin in there. Now we'll tighten up the upper bolt and put the cotter pin in. There we go. And let's not forget to pin the lower control arm bracket. So after I tighten it down, I back it off just a little bit to line up the hole to put the cotter pin in. Then, these are pretty easy. You just bend the cotter pin around. And I'll use my channel lock pliers here and make it look pretty, maybe. Because, you know, when people look under the car, they're going to see this. Okay, now we'll do the one on the other side. Then we're going to hook up the flexible brake hose that goes right here. And again, it's a brand new hose with a brand new washer and nut. And then we'll snug this down. This brake hose is a 3/8 Whitworth on the inboard and a, wait for it, 1/2 Whitworth on the big nut. So we'll just snug that up. There we go. Here's our hub, which also happens to be our brake drum. So we're going to put this onto this. As you can see, there's already a lot of grease in there. So we're just going to put it on the way it is for now. What is this? Dog. This is a pretty straightforward process. We'll see how bad I can screw this up. Well, that looks to be in place. Washer nut. Of course, it never hurts to put a little more grease in, like that. And then we have our washer that goes on there, and the nut. I can't tell you what the torque on this nut is supposed to be because I haven't found out yet. So what I did is I just tightened it down pretty tight until I got to a slot where the cotter pin lined up. And I'm going to leave it like this until I figure out what the torque is. I'll get back to you. The steering rack was not reconditioned. This was taken off and set to the side, and that's the way I got it. So it's kind of hard to see, but this is the original grease, and it's really like glue. So that's the steering rack. I am not going to videotape me taking it apart and cleaning it and putting it back together, because I just did it on the reconditioning of the 64 MGB. So if you want to see how to take a steering rack apart and redo it, you can look at that video. On a side note though, this is pretty yucky stuff. Oh, look what I did. I put on the steering rack. And not only did I install the steering rack, I installed the tie rod ends. So now that I have the steering rack installed and the little tie rod ends on, I'm going to share with you my foolproof method of aligning the front end of your MG. It's perfect. It works every time, guaranteed. Okay, here we go. What you do is you get in the car, you drive it to the tire house, they put it on the machine, and they adjust the toe in. That's it. Costs about $100. Perfect every time. However, in the meantime, this is what I'm going to do to eyeball it for now. The first thing I do is turn the steering wheel to the middle. It just happens to be right there. With this in the middle, it gives me the same distance from the end of the steering rack to the end of the adjusting rod, which is someplace in here. I put the tie rod end on the adjusting rod, and I just eyeball the brake drum so it looks straight. Then I take my 7/16 wrench, put it on the adjusting rod, like that. Then by turning it, I can move the brake drum and the axle this way and this way. To get the alignment close, what I do is I just measure it from the front of the tire to the frame and try to get about the same measurement front to back. And that's going to be good enough until I can get it over to a professional. And finally, the last thing I'm going to do, we're going to go around and we're going to hit all the grease fittings. There's 2 grease fittings on each side, one on the top and one on the bottom. And what we do is we pump it in until it comes out. So as I put the grease in the lower fitting, I can see it coming out that little hole in the bottom, which means it's full of grease. And now it's time for my favorite part of the show. How much have I spent so far? Okay, we'll start with the cost of the car, $6,000. The cost to move the car from the island to my garage, $1,230. Those little teeny tiny beehive springs that hold the brake shoes to the plate for the back axle, those, 4 of them, $7.16. And of course, the cost to get these lovely tires put on these snazzy wheels was $191.44. So far, this MGTD has cost me $7,428.60. And we haven't even gotten started yet. Okay, I can't wait to start buying my own parts for this car instead of digging through boxes looking for the parts that are supposed to be here. Anyway, if you want to follow along and watch me build this 1952 MGTD, please subscribe to Robert's British Cars. I've got plenty to keep me busy till next time. See you then.